All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation. Good morning, good afternoon. I know we have folks joining us from all across the country, so we really appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules to tune in to today's conversation. My name is Priya Pandey, and I am currently a policy analyst on the Immigration and Immigrant Families team at the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP, and I am honored to welcome you to the 2025 National Immigration Summit From Harm to Hope, supporting kids and empowering communities through advocacy and practice, hosted by Children at Risk. Children at Risk is a nonpartisan Texas nonprofit that drives policy, research, and advocacy on behalf of children statewide and nationally. Today's event is also hosted in partnership with the Children Thrive Action Network, or CTAN. This Children Thrive Action Network centers immigrant children and families, amplifying their needs, rights, and futures at a time of rapid policy change. Today, we'll be hearing from advocates, legal experts, and state leaders about how recent federal and state actions are shaping children's lives and what we can do to protect and support them. In the chat today, you'll find a link to today's agenda, speaker bios, and our event survey. And a few quick notes before we begin. This event is being recorded. Slides and resources will be emailed to all registrants. We encourage you to use the Q&A box to submit questions throughout the event, and we encourage you to stay for closing reflections and action steps. And with that, we're going to get started with our program for today. So for our first speaker, I would like to welcome Sima Sethi, a senior policy analyst at the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP. Sima leads CLASP's work on immigrant access to public benefits and early childhood policy with a focus on how immigration enforcement impacts young children. She's going to help kick off today's summit with a grounding conversation on data. So Suma, I'm going to go ahead and turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Priya, and thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to Children at Risk for organizing this event and welcoming me to the summit. I get the enviable task of kicking us off with some very exciting statistics. Get ready for a wild ride, folks. I'm really just going to give a brief overview on the demographics of immigrant children and children of immigrants in the US. Next slide, please. So 25% of children in the US, or 18.4 million, are children with at least one immigrant parent. And when I say immigrants, I mean people who are born outside of the US, regardless of their immigration or citizenship status. Many children of immigrants are also immigrants themselves, but the majority of children of immigrants are US citizens, or 90%, 16.5 million children. This map, it's from the Urban Institute. It depicts the share of children of immigrants in each state. The 5 states with the highest share of children of immigrants are California, New Jersey, New York, Florida, and Nevada. Those should not come as any surprise to folks. But again, immigrants and their children are everywhere. 1 in 4 children are in the US are children of immigrants. Give a shout out in the chat if you live in one of these lighter colored states in the chat, or lighter colored states. I'd love to hear from you. The share of children of immigrants in the US has increased slightly in the past decade and a half, from 22% in 2006 to 25% starting in 2021. But since then, it's plateaued. The average age of children of immigrants is increasing, meaning that there are fewer young children of immigrants. If you're interested in a detailed breakdown of children of immigrants by year, age group, and state, the Urban Institute's tool has trends on this data since '06, which I believe we've included in the follow-up resources. Next slide, please. Children in immigrant families are also racially and ethnically diverse. The blue bars on this chart, hopefully they're not too small, they show the race and ethnicity of the children of immigrants, while the red bars display the race and ethnicity of all children. I will say these categories, while while imperfect, they do align with census categories. You'll see that the majority of children of immigrants are Hispanic, then Asian, white, multiracial, Black, and then Native American slash Indigenous. Next slide, please. So, what does mixed status mean? The majority of immigrant families are mixed status. It's a term that we use to describe families who have family members with different immigration statuses from each other. For example, undocumented parents with US citizen children. From the most recently available data on this statistic, which is from 2018, there are 2.5 million children overall who have at least one undocumented parent. 85% of these children are US citizens. And when we say undocumented, we mean people without a stable legal status, but that doesn't mean that the government isn't aware of these folks. Some undocumented people are in the process of applying for asylum, for example, or have orders of protection from removal, like DACA recipients. Speaking of DACA recipients, these are folks with deferred action for childhood arrival status. More than 250,000 children have parents with DACA. DACA was created in 2012. It grants work authorization and protection from deportation for eligible individuals who arrived in the US as children. At the moment, the status of DACA is uncertain. New applicants are no longer being processed, but current DACA recipients can still renew their status. Forward US analysis of 2023 data estimates that around 260,000 US citizen children have parents who have temporary protected status or TPS. TPS is a designation that protects non citizens in the US, including children. They protect them from being returned to a country that cannot safely receive them and where they are likely to experience harm. TPS provides work authorization, but it does not provide a pathway to citizenship. But still, over 1 million people have relied on the program and built enduring ties to the US. CLASP recently released a fact sheet about TPS that outlines recent efforts by the Trump administration to strip people of TPS status and the harm that could cause families and communities. The fact sheet also includes original analysis of TPS recipients, including the number of children and young children that TPS eligible folks have by state. So I encourage you all to check it out. Next slide, please. There are approximately 2 million immigrant children in the US or children who are not born in the US. And in 2023, there were, this is still 2023 data. Nearly 1.5 million children under the age of 18 were estimated to be undocumented. This population is often referred to as dreamers. In fiscal year 2024, around 99K unaccompanied children were released to sponsors. But thus far in this fiscal year, which is from October 1st of 2024 through the end of August of this year, only around 24,000 have been released to sponsors, which is less than a quarter of the number in fiscal year 2024. The steep decline is due to increased enforcement and restrictive border policies. We're going to have a number of esteemed panelists and experts who will speak more on that. Just to clarify our terms, unaccompanied children include children who enter the country without their parent or legal guardian, and children who have been separated from their parent or legal guardian for other reasons. Next slide, please. Immigrant families and children are long-standing members of our community. Among children with foreign-born parents, nearly 3/4 of them have a foreign-born parent that has been in the US for over a decade. 42% have a foreign-born parent that has been in the US for more than 2 decades. Unfortunately, children of immigrants and immigrant children are disproportionately poorer despite high employment rates among their parents and high work effort. This is due to a number of factors, but one obvious factor is how this nation's laws make it extremely challenging for many immigrants from working legally and to have legal status. Many immigrants are barred from public benefits like public health insurance and food assistance, which exacerbates their situations. And the recently passed reconciliation bill will exacerbate the challenges immigrants face in accessing basic needs. Again, you'll be hearing from our experts with more details about what's in the bill and how it will impact immigrants, but I did want to present a couple of stats just for level setting. Next slide, please. Nearly 2.7 million children are going to be impacted by new laws from the Budget Reconciliation Act that bar US citizen children who only have an ITIN holding parent from the child tax credit. ITIN is also known as an individual taxpayer identification number. It's for folks who do not have a social security number. And I will say this 2.7 million is in addition to the 1.3 million children with an ITIN who are already carved out of the CTC due to this 2017 tax bill, which the budget reconciliation bill now makes permanent. We also estimate that up to 2.5 million US citizen children who live with the non citizen will be impacted by the budget bill carving out immigrants from SNAP eligibility. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It provides food benefits, food assistance to many low income families. So these children, we estimate they might be impacted due to a documented chilling effect that occur when immigrants are carved out of benefits. If they live with a non-citizen, this means less food for the overall household. This means that there will be more fear of applying for these public benefit programs, and US citizen children will be left out. We also estimate that up to 10% of the entire US child population could be impacted by ICE enforcement. This budget bill provides billions of dollars in immigration enforcement, and that is going to impact all children. But for this estimate, we include the number of US citizen children with an undocumented household member plus the number of undocumented children. And that actually makes up 10% of the entire US child population. Next slide, please. So all of these impacts are because immigration status is a social determinant of health in this country. And parents' immigration status also matter and impact their children's well-being as it impacts their ability to work and access healthcare coverage, food and housing assistance, and childcare, among other basic needs. Immigration policy, it spans every single policy sector that touches our everyday lives because we're not talking about an issue, we're talking about a population, children. You're going to be hearing from other excellent speakers during this summit on the ways in which we can continue to support children in all of these different sectors. And that's why CLASP and others have banded together to create the Children Thrive Action Network. Next slide, please. This is also known as CTAN. CTAN is a network that brings together immigration and child advocates to advocate for the needs of mixed status or children in mixed status families and immigrant children. We seek to mitigate the harm of anti-immigrant policies and actions on children in mixed status families in the short term, while also advancing positive policy outcomes in the long term. We have over 130 members and allies who represent a wide variety of local, state, and national organizations. They work directly with or on behalf of children in immigrant families, and our membership spans at least 20 states. Please join us. We'll put the link in the chat or in follow-up resources. And I'm sure you'll have access to my email address, and you can always please reach out if you have any questions about the network, any other questions about research and demographics of immigrant children. I really, really appreciate you all for your time and your attention during this ridiculous time right now. And I appreciate you, and I look forward to collaborating with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Suma, for grounding us in such a powerful data picture and context. I know for folks tuning in today, we would love to hear your reflections or any questions that you may have for Suma in our Q&A function. So we encourage you to please take advantage of that space, type in any questions you might have on the data shared or any reflections and thoughts. Also, I want to bring your attention to the chat. We are sharing some amazing companion resources in the chat throughout this conversation. So some of the stuff that Suma mentioned, you can find the complementary resources for that in the chat as well. And so with that, it is so clear with the data that Suma just shared that immigrant children and families are navigating incredibly complex challenges that are being shaped both by policy and perception. And taking that context in mind, we're now going to turn to our federal policy panel. In our federal policy panel, we will be hearing from national experts on how current immigration policies are impacting access to public benefits, enforcement practices, and the well-being of unaccompanied children. This conversation is going to focus both on threats and opportunities at the federal level, and importantly, what advocates and providers can do to support children and families right now. And with that, I would like you all to welcome our panelists for this conversation. So first, we have Rachel Prandini, Managing Attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, or ILRC. Rachel leads ILRC's legal work on immigration enforcement and protection for youth and families. We're also joined by Ann Kelsey, a senior policy analyst at the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights and focuses on immigration policy for children with disabilities and promotes child-centered protections. Next, we have Esther Reyes, a campaign strategist at the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition. Esther leads national advocacy on immigration access to healthcare and public benefits. And we're also having Wendy Cervantes, Director of Immigration and Immigrant Families at CLASP, to moderate this discussion today. Wendy brings years of experience working at the intersection of child advocacy and immigration policy. And with that, I will turn it over to Wendy and our panelists.
Thank you, Priya, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Of course, as soon as this got passed over to me, I got a frog in my throat, so hopefully I won't be coughing through all of this. Again, I'm Wendy Cervantes. In addition to my role at CLASP, I'm also director of the Children Thrive Action Network, or CTAN, and it is such a pleasure to be with you all today. I really appreciate you all sharing space with us. So as Priya laid out, our session has the daunting task to provide context about the current immigration policy landscape and also provide some actionable steps advocates and providers can take to support immigrant children and families. And look, the truth is we're in some deeply challenging times and our kids and families are hurting. As a daughter of immigrants and a mom of two young daughters myself, my heart is broken every single day. We've seen one executive action after another to undermine immigrants and their families' access to healthcare, housing, even early education, along with unprecedented interior enforcement actions that are ripping parents away from their children. We saw a budget reconciliation bill that Suma referenced earlier pass in July that doubles down on the harm to immigrant families, including alarming increases in the budget of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, to basically fund mass deportation. We've also seen efforts to dismantle even the most basic protections for some of our most vulnerable children, unaccompanied children who have come to the US in search of safety. So I will flag that we will not go into full detail on all of the policy changes. We will provide several resources, including a summary from CTAN on the various policy changes to date, because we really want to make sure that we're able to focus enough time on what can be done to meet this moment and to give you all time to ask questions. So please feel free to add those questions as we go. We have a truly incredible panel today, advocates who are working hard every day to ensure our families are informed and to protect our communities. I know for me, working with them gives me hope every day. And so I'm so happy to welcome them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel, whom Priya already introduced and whose bios will be shared. So Esther, I'm going to get started with you. Um, I mentioned the passage of HR 1 in July, also referred to as the Trump Budget Reconciliation Bill, or OBBA. There was a lot in this bill, so I'm going to ask you to share just a few of the most significant changes specific to immigrants' access to benefits, especially as we think about potential harms for children.
Thank you, Wendy, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Um, I'm excited to share this space with you all. Not particularly excited to share this information because it's difficult information and changes that are going to be impacting children across the country, and that have targeted specifically immigrants and children, immigrant children. And so a couple of the things that happened, or changes rather, that were enacted as a result of HR 1 or OBBA. First, as was mentioned earlier, the HR 1 now permanently extends the exclusion of children with I-10s from the child tax credit, from receiving the child tax credit. And further, it now excludes all children whose parents have I-10s and don't have a social security number from claiming that child tax credit as well. So HR 1 will continue to not only exclude children with I-10s, but now, in addition, will restrict eligibility for, as was mentioned earlier, over 2 million US citizen children that do have a social security number, but one of their parents does not. And we know that the I-10 is a huge tool and substantially reduces child poverty by supporting families who are more likely to be in low-wage jobs. So this is going to have a huge impact on children. A couple of other things that HR 1 did is that it strips eligibility for programs like Medicaid, CHIP, Medicare, and financial assistance for coverage through the ACA marketplace, in addition to SNAP for a number of previously eligible and lawfully present immigrants. And so one of the big things that we like, that the administration and Congress likes to tell us, is that they're going after people who are undocumented or don't qualify, that paint the picture that are abusing these services and aren't supposed to be receiving them. But the reality is that this bill has excluded people with, including children with lawful permanent or lawful statuses.
Thank you, Esther, for highlighting those changes. Given that, I mean, and we know the budget reconciliation bill is only one piece of it, right? There's also been all of these executive actions.
Mhm.
What are a few tips that you would give providers that are serving immigrant families, and what resources can your organization, the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition, provide?
Yeah. So needless to say, our families and our communities are living in fear. And it's the combination of restrictions, more enforcement, as you mentioned, Wendy, concerns over data sharing, the notices that have been coming out about federal public benefits. And together, these result in a massive chilling effect, which mean families think twice about accessing services that are critical for their children. One of the biggest concerns that we've seen is concerns over data privacy and what's going to be shared. If I provide this information on an application, what of that information is going to be shared with DHS or some immigration enforcement agency? So we think it's really important to provide clear information and to be honest with our families and our communities about the risks of that 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 they run, but also help them understand what the situation is and help them make informed decisions about accessing public programs. So really weighing the risk and the benefits of accessing these services. And we do have a one-pager to help anyone who works directly with communities on messages so that they can know how to communicate and answer some of these questions that families have on privacy, on data privacy.
Thank you, Esther. It's so true that it's a really scary time. And at the same time, I think we always struggle with like the balance of just really being honest with our community, but also giving them also the opportunity to make the best decision for them and their families. And PIF has always been so great at providing the resources for families to do just that. So I encourage everyone to check out the resources and to check out the PIF website. They are always up to date and providing rapid response analysis to all of the changes that are happening. All right, so Esther, don't go anywhere. We're coming back to you. I'm going to move over to Rachel. Hi, Rachel. We're going to move over to the topic of interior immigration enforcement. Rachel, it's kind of a hard question to ask, but I was going to ask you, like, how have you basically, how have you seen interior enforcement threats against mixed status families evolve over the past year? And what strategies are you seeing that are working to help protect their rights?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, for the question. This is a hard and big question, and I'm sure anyone who's, watching the news already has a sense of how things have evolved. But since January, we have seen the government really largely do away with any of the protective policies that they previously had in place. For example, things like policies to not make immigration arrests at schools or hospitals or places of worship. So they've gotten rid of those policies, and they have also stopped prioritizing just certain populations for immigration enforcement. And so what that means is that everyone is at risk, and people feel that, and we see that in our communities. The government has been more aggressive in pursuing people for immigration arrests, and they have been more indiscriminate in terms of who they arrest. We've definitely heard of US citizens being arrested in the mix. So there's just a very heightened risk of enforcement against mixed status families that is very unlike what we have seen before. At the same time that the government has changed their kind of policies and approach, they have also allocated many more resources to immigration enforcement than we've seen before. And that's been a combination of, shifting people who are working in other federal agencies over to assist with immigration enforcement, and also some of the things that you talked about, Wendy, in terms of additional funding for immigration enforcement through the reconciliation bill. So it's a very challenging time, and I know you already set the stage with that, but in terms of strategies that are working to protect people's rights, people's first line of defense is always going to be understanding and exercising their constitutional rights. Most importantly, to remain silent, also to not sign any documents, and to not allow ICE into their home unless ICE has a signed judicial warrant, which they almost never have. Asserting your rights in the face of law enforcement requires definitely advanced knowledge, planning, and practicing asserting those rights. And so there are a lot of resources out there to help people understand and practice asserting their rights. We definitely recommend that people attend or watch a training on understanding your constitutional rights. My organization creates something called red cards that are like a small wallet-sized card that you can carry with you that lists your constitutional rights and actually helps you assert them without saying anything. You could simply hand the card to law enforcement or slide it under your door. And we are also, what's helping is making sure that people get, if they can, an immigration screening with a qualified immigration attorney to really understand what their situation is and what options they have. And then also that parents and caregivers of minor children put together a family preparedness plan. And those are just actions that people can take in advance in the context of this really scary immigration enforcement era that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Rachel. To dig a little deeper on the issue of helping parents to prepare for possible deportation, not asking to do a full tutorial right now, but if you can flag some of like the basic things that they should be considering and when they think about creating a deportation plan, I'm sure folks would welcome hearing more about that.
Yeah, so definitely we in addition to suggesting that all people who are concerned about immigration enforcement, learn more about their rights and get an immigration screening, for parents and other caregivers of minor children, we also recommend putting together what people call a family preparedness plan, or an emergency preparedness plan. That's really a plan that the parents are thinking about and working on now in advance about what they would want for their children if they were detained or deported. So it's a really hard subject for parents to think about, and it's a way for them to exercise some agency in advance, at a time when, what is going to happen to them and their family feels really outside of their control. And so that includes thinking in advance about updating emergency contacts at their children's school and daycare providers, identifying a backup caregiver, so who would be available and who would the parents want the children to go with, whether that's temporarily or long term. Really discussing in advance with the backup caregiver that the family identifies what the expectations are and what the plan would be, and pulling together a file of important documents that can be kept in a safe place that the backup caregiver would know how to locate, that would have all the important information and documents that they would need to be able to step in and take care of the child. So my organization has a kind of a template and a step-by-step plan to help families do this. And hopefully that is going to be shared in the chat box. So yeah, supporting immigrant families and doing this in advance really, really is a helpful tool. The other thing that I think parents should really know and be aware of if they're concerned about detention or deportation is that ICE actually has its own policy that it is supposed to follow when they arrest a parent or a guardian of minor children. And under that policy, they are supposed to allow the parent or guardian to make alternate care arrangements for their children before detaining them if they have a minor child. They're also supposed to, if they're going to detain them locally, close to where their children are. They're also supposed to allow contact visitation with children. They're supposed to, if the parent is actually going to be deported, give them an opportunity to make plans for their children, whether that means setting up a legal guardianship in the United States or coordinating their child's travel to be able to also return to the country of origin. But these are things that, even though ICE has a policy that says that's what they're supposed to do, ICE is not going to do as a matter of course. So parents need to know these things. And, and if they have an attorney who can help them advocate with ICE, that's great. But even if they don't, a family member who's aware of this, who can help them advocate with ICE, just really important to know even that ICE is supposed to be doing this, so that they know to ask and to push for those things. So we also have a resource on that, and hopefully that's being shared in the chat box as well.
Yes, thank you. That resource on the detained parent directive will be included in the chat, as well as on the follow-up resources. And I agree that even though we can't necessarily count on ICE to follow even its own policies, it is encouraging to know that they actually updated and revised this year under this administration, so that at least it's not something that's been rescinded, and we can at least do our best as both advocates and in preparing parents to try to hold them accountable to it. So really appreciate the resource. All right, I'm now gonna turn it over to Anne. Hi, Anne. Welcome. We're gonna talk a little bit about the threats facing unaccompanied children. So I was gonna have you get us started by sharing with us some of the threats that are facing unaccompanied children. I know there's many, so just a few, and any wins that you would like to highlight.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, for having me here and asking these questions. And the attacks on unaccompanied immigrant children are coming fast and furious. And I know that Suma gave that great definition when we started, but for folks who joined late, just so you know who we're talking about, unaccompanied children are young people under the age of 18 who entered the country alone or without their parent or guardian, or who were later separated from that parent or guardian. And these children are placed in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is an agency under the Department of Health and Human Services. And this split of ORR from the immigration enforcement authorities under DHS was purposeful. It was set up by a bipartisan Congress to ensure that the Office of Refugee Resettlement could have a child welfare mandate. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the administration has really turned ORR into an arm of DHS, into an ICE enforcement operation. So as Suma also mentioned, to begin with, ORR has put in very intense sponsor vetting requirements before children are allowed to be released to their sponsors, who are usually close family members. And so it's things like DNA testing, income verification requirements, heightened identification, including in-person verification of identification, which has led to sponsors being detained at those checks. And all of this has led to skyrocketing stays in custody. Again, I'm repeating Suma, her great introduction, but the number of kids getting released from our custody is minuscule. That 24,000 number that she mentioned is the fiscal year. So starting from last fall, and a lot of those kids then were released before the Trump administration. The average stay in custody now is 180 days, up from 30 last year. And so I saw Kathy asked in the chat, what's happening to these children? They're staying in custody for months and months. Increased numbers are taking voluntary departure, even if their return plans are not leading them to safety and security in their home country, or they are aging out of custody at 18. Kids at that point can be released, but we're seeing for kids with law enforcement interactions in their past, those children are being taken into ICE custody. And all of this uncertainty, this upheaval, we're just seeing it, it's affecting the kids that we serve, and the anxiety, the depression, the hopelessness is just, everywhere with the kids and with their families who, have welcoming homes ready for these kids. But of course, they didn't stop with the vetting requirements. They have also turned to the investigative arm of ICE, HSI, to target kids and their families who have been released in the gist of wellness checks. But they look like armed men in plain clothes showing up at families' houses, frightening and alarming and intimidating kids and their families. And then they've started to come and interview kids in facilities. In the past, that would only happen if a child was involved in, or needed to be interviewed for some serious investigation. But now it seems to be without regard for the situation. And these are not people trained in child welfare, child's best interest. These are law enforcement people. And then, but I'll say one more, things really escalated recently when over Labor Day weekend, the administration attempted to summarily remove Guatemalan children back to Guatemala in the middle of the night without warning to the children, their families, or their advocates. Stephen Miller alleged that, publicly that this was for family reunification purposes, that, their families in Guatemala wanted them back. That turned out to be a lie. And in fact, the Guatemalan government, had not even identified most of the parents. And in many cases where they had, the families indicated it was not safe for the children to return. Thankfully, attorneys and advocates were able to go to court to get these removals stopped. So I think that's a win. The court issued a preliminary injunction in the case LGML v. Nome, and I think we'll be able to drop a link in there to some more information about that case. And the judge, who was a Trump appointee under Trump 1.0, really called the government to account on these misrepresentations of the, what was going on in terms of the return of children. So I think I'll pause there. There's so many, but I don't want to take over the whole time.
Oh, no, I really appreciate that. And I'm really happy, even though it was like really awful about what the administration tried to do to these youth. I'm so grateful to the Young Center and the National Immigration Law Center and those who really stepped in for this victory on behalf of kids. There's still so much more that needs to be done. But really, really grateful for, we don't see a lot of wins. And it's really good to share them when we can. So I'm gonna ask you a similar question as I've asked others, which is what tips would you can you share with providers who are maybe serving unaccompanied children, and how in ways that they can support them and their families at this time? It looks like Anne may have frozen, so I'm going to give her a moment to maybe come back to us in a second and we can revisit that question. And I'm looking at someone. And we may have lost her. Okay, well, she'll come back. I know she will. She is a fighter. So I'm going to turn to one of our closing questions, and I'll give her an opportunity to weigh in on that when she's able to join us again. But one question I wanted to ask all of you before we. Oh, I see her. Hi, Anne. You're back. So in case you didn't hear my question, I will repeat it. Just what tips would you give to providers who may be working with unaccompanied children in their classrooms? And we know in some cases they may not know that they're unaccompanied, but or in their, someone that they're serving, a client. Can you share any tips for how they can help support these children and their families?
Yes, and apologies for the internet issue. And I think, what I'll say probably echoes what Rachel has said and what our future panelists will said, in terms of the importance of making a plan. And unaccompanied children who have been released, in many ways face the same challenges and situations that children of immigrant families who came with their families are facing, but unaccompanied children also had their own path, and so may have been separated from their parents for years, if not decades, or maybe with a caregiver who is not their parent or guardian, and so that is just an extra layer of the importance of planning for what might happen if one of those caregivers is detained and deported. So I think just recognizing that the children that you are working with come from different paths and backgrounds, and that can be sort of taken into consideration for planning for the planning support.
Thank you, Anne. All right. Before I turn it over to the questions from our participants, I'm just going to ask each of you just to provide us with some actions that that providers, community members, and advocates can take at this time to push back against harmful policies, or even just to show support for immigrant children and families. I hear a lot from people that they feel like there's nothing that they can do right now, and they feel a bit powerless. And I'm hopeful that you can give them some suggestions for what they can do. So Esther, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Wendy. I think being here and being informed and staying informed is one of the most critical steps that advocates and service providers can continue to take, particularly people who are on the front lines and working with the communities and our families who are directly impacted by these changes and these threats. I think it's important to validate the fear and the uncertainty that these families experience, and collaborate with organizations like PIF, like CTAN, who are coalitions rather, who are developing mechanisms and tools to document the harm, right, that these families are experiencing. I think it's a really important step, especially in states like Texas, where the protections are even fewer, right, than than in other states. And I think that that's going to be a really critical step for folks to take. So that's definitely something that you can keep hearing more about through our PIF working groups, also through CTAN. Um, so we encourage folks to do that. And I would say too, right? There are advocacy opportunities at both the federal and the state levels. Um, we know that repealing some of these at the federal level may take a bit of time, but there are actions and um, uh, just policies that we can push at the state level to either protect access to benefits or perhaps expand it now that some of these communities are no longer going to have access to them because of HR1. So we encourage, advocates and people on the front line. I like to say you all are the experts on this, right? You see this every day, you see the impact, you see how these things are working. And we really need those voices to in advocacy against these policies. And there's a space for that too at PIF. At a plug, we have a state and federal policy working groups that folks can join.
Absolutely. I am part of some of those and really appreciate them. Okay, so same question to you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, fully agree with everything Esther shared. I think, sharing information and resources with impacted families is very helpful. I think there's such an overwhelm of information and the policies are changing so quickly. It's difficult even for those of us who work professionally in this field to keep up with. And so I think that if you can help direct families to accurate information and resources, that's very helpful. I think also just, since you all are really seeing and living with the impacts of these policy changes every day, just sharing those stories with friends, with neighbors, so that people understand um, how this is actually impacting people's daily lives. I think it's one thing to read about a budget headline and another thing to hear about stories of children and families who are struggling because of it. And then, as Esther said, also if you are able to share those stories with policymakers, there are opportunities, depending on where you are, where you're living, to advocate even with your local government for protective actions that they can take that are not going to, make up for these budget changes, but they might soften the blow a little bit. There might be small ways that local government can take actions to support immigrant families, as well as state governments if you live in a state that might be open to those types of things. And then just a couple of other ideas, in terms of immigration enforcement, if you are a US citizen and you see immigration enforcement happening and you feel comfortable with it, you do have a right to record what's going on. And that can be really important to document when ICE is violating the law and how they arrest and detain people. So if you're comfortable with that, that is your right to, not interfere, but to record the interaction. And then I think just making your voice heard. If you don't agree with some of these policy changes and especially can share examples of how you're seeing them impact people, go attend a march or a rally or get involved in one of these working groups and share your story. Yeah, I think I'll pause there.
Great. And I'll give you an opportunity to add anything. And then we have about 3 minutes left and at least one audience question I'd like to get to.
Amazing. Yeah, I was just nodding strongly along with Rachel of the importance of sharing your story. We work with legislators who may be, Democrats or friendly, but they say, I don't really want to hear from, organizations with immigrant in their name, right? They want to hear from their constituents and people who can speak up and tell their story from the perspective of, being a teacher or a school administrator or a social worker or a pediatrician or the faith leader, and to be able to tell, directly what you are seeing in your community is really, really powerful. I also encourage you to call your legislators. It's been shown that folks with more conservative views call their legislators more often than folks with more liberal views. And, I'd really love to see just folks doing regular calls to their offices, saying, this is what I'm seeing, this is wrong, this is what you should do about it. And to just get comfortable doing that so that they are hearing from their constituents about what folks are seeing on the ground. And then I would be remiss not to end with the fact that the Young Center works with volunteers to be child advocates with children in custody. And we're also looking as well for to partner with folks who can tell stories about immigrant children. And so do feel free to look on the Young Center's website and if you're interested in volunteering or supporting our work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne. And then one quick question from someone in the Q&A is where are people who are vulnerable and afraid turning to for information? Who are trusted sources? And I was going to turn it over to Esther for this question, although I know it's something that almost everyone can answer.
I think it's those places that where families regularly interact, right, with clinics and schools and churches, and organizations and food pantries. I think those are the places where, though there's fear about approaching these places, for a number of reasons, it's also where they have traditionally just gotten to know people there and trusted the services there. And so there's a role for all of these places and localities to play in all of this, right? And understanding what their own role is in ensuring that those spaces are safe for communities to the extent possible, and being prepared to receive those families and communities who come to us. So I think those are where people are going because that is where they've gone.
Thank you, Esther. And there's a lot of, community-based organizations that are also part of PIF. And I know that's, they are where people are going, and it's important to have them in the network. All right, well, we are at time. For those of you who had questions that you weren't able to share, please continue to add them in the Q&A, and we'll also provide the email information of our panelists for folks who want to follow up. I want to thank our panelists again for being here and taking the time. Thanks to everyone for their engagement that are participating today. And I will just echo that not only are you all like trusted people that families can turn to, but you're also powerful messengers to policymakers. And so we encourage you to use your voice. So with that, I'm going to close out the panel and turn it back over to Priya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wendy, for moderating that conversation. And a huge thank you to all of our panelists. Can we get some love reactions, some rounds of applause in the Zoom chat from our participants? Thanks, y'all, so much for being so engaged. I saw the emojis coming in. I see you all using the Q&A function. So like Wendy mentioned, please feel free to drop your questions and thoughts and reflections in the Q&A box. We'll be responding throughout the program, answering your questions and providing resources. I also just want to acknowledge something really important that Wendy said, and I think was a huge theme in this panel. I know that this year we're really working at the challenge of how things are going in the current policy climate that we live in, and we want to acknowledge how difficult things are right now, but so many providers, advocates, and community members are so willing to show up and are really giving us so much hope right now. And we hope that in today's conversation, you can continue to find new ways to be engaged and be inspired and see all of the critical work that is underway to ensure that children and immigrant families' rights and well-being is being protected. I also want to plug in a couple of resources that are relevant to some of the information that's been shared so far. So through the Children Thrive Action Network, we actually have a brief that we wrote on the impacts of the recent budget reconciliation bill that outlines these policies and also shares some data that was presented in Suma's earlier data portrait. We also have a document that explains the current policy threats that children and immigrant families are doing. So we're going to have those shared in the chat. We encourage you all to please look through these resources, and you can find some more detailed information as well as the information that was shared in our panel convo. Next, I just want to give a quick plug in to our social media handles. We are going to be live tweeting and live sharing social media content throughout this event. So please feel free to plug in on socials, send out your own posts, and we'll be on the lookout to reshare those. So with that, I'm going to move us to our next conversation, which will be our messaging session led by Melissa Steck. Melissa Steck is a strategist with deep experience helping organizations communicate about immigrant families with clarity, compassion, and impact. This interactive session will explore how to discuss immigration enforcement, family separation, public benefits, pathways to citizenship in ways that invite audiences into advocacy and action. So please give another warm welcome with those reaction emojis in the chat for Melissa.
Thank you so much, Priya, and hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Nice to be with you all, and a huge thank you for the invitation. And thank you to all of you for being here today. As Priya mentioned, my name is Melissa Steck. I am the founder and lead consultant of Mountain Gem Advocacy and Communications. I'm based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so, the other thing I wanted to mention is that I am the comms lead for the Children Thrive Action Network, who is obviously helping host today's event and bring it to you all. So with that, we're going to be talking today about our kids. So how to message effectively about children in immigrant families and immigrant children in this challenging environment. Next slide, please. So our roadmap for today, we'll start with a brief poll just to get you reactivated and engaged for a new session. We'll talk about what the messaging challenges are that you might be facing. Then we'll dive into leveraging your messaging for success. So how to talk about kids and immigrant families right now. So we'll talk about determining your goal and your audience, and then pivot to how to craft your message effectively. So we'll talk about basically what all the research says. I mean, I haven't read all the research, but what a lot of the research says about talking about immigration and immigrants in our communities. So that'll be sort of our tips section, and then how to do it. So we'll give you some tools for how to craft some effective messaging, go over an example, and then make some time for Q&A. Next slide. All right, so to start us off, would love to hear from you all. What have been some of your greatest messaging challenges this year regarding immigrant children? So you have all had pop up right in front of you a prompt to fill out this little Zoom poll. So think about what have been some of your greatest messaging challenges this year regarding immigrant children and children in immigrant families. So maybe another way to say that is, when have you found yourself thinking, how am I going to say this to the person that I need to say this to regarding this topic, right? So what's been an area of challenge for you? And if you feel like one of those four top choices is not representative of a challenge you're facing, feel free to select other and give a few words as to what you might be having a particular challenge communicating with your audiences about. So we'll give you just a moment to do that. And then when we have sort of a critical mass of responses, I will invite my team on the back end to share sort of the poll results. So again, think about your greatest messaging challenges. Is it regarding detention and deportation, family separation, about access to resources for immigrant children and children in immigrant families, access to services for immigrant youth, such as legal representation to help them navigate the immigration system, and keeping certain sensitive areas safe from immigration enforcement in our communities, like schools, hospitals, places of worship, courtrooms, etc. So how are we looking on the back end, Becky and all?
I believe we have 73 who have participated, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and then send you the results.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, let's get a thumbs up reaction if you can see the results on the screen in front of you. All right, thank you. Okay, so it looks like we have a pretty decent representation of all of the above. So challenge is talking about our current reality of detention, deportation, family separation. Although we've got a pretty even split between detention and family separation and keeping places like schools safe from immigration actions. And then in a close second is access to benefits for folks. So, well, thank you so much. That gives me some really good insight into what you all are concerned about and what you would like some support with in communicating in your circles about these issues and how to do so effectively. And I think based on what I've prepared today, I think and I hope that there will be something for each of you to take away and to support you. So next slide, please. All right, so we all know that there's no perfect magical formula, no perfect magical message that will make for the outcome that you want, but we do know of some key elements that are needed to better position you for success. So a formula for us to work with here today and for you moving forward is to determine your goal, determine your audience, craft your effective message, and from there, you should have at least some level of communications success. Next slide. Before you decide what to say and to whom you will say it, you should make sure that you are clear on your goal. So think about what's the change you're looking for, the outcome that you're seeking. What are you trying to achieve? And a lot of you are in nonprofit spaces, so I'd imagine you're familiar with SMART goals. So this should be as smart as possible. Your goal should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So an example that I'm thinking of for the space and for the conversation we're having today, you might have the goal of getting your school administration to partner with a local legal service provider to help connect immigrant families with, so that students feel safe and to keep kids in school and to help keep families together. And I have other examples too, based on the representation of the poll, but in the interest of time, we'll keep plugging away with this one example. Next slide, please. So once you've clarified your goal, you must determine your audience, or who you'll be targeting with your messaging to help you achieve your goal. Okay, so think about who is the target that you're trying to influence. And additionally, you might want to think about a secondary audience or a supporting audience. Who might you be mobilizing or equipping to influence your target? So with the goal example that I gave on the previous slide, your target would likely be school administrators and board, and maybe your supporters or secondary audience would be teachers, students, and families, to sort of build out your coalition to communicate that message to the higher ups. And just a note on who isn't your audience. Something to keep in mind is that you don't want to target someone who is entirely immovable on your issue. Okay, we reserve our capacity for the persuadable and the movable. So for example, staunchly anti-immigrant folks, very loyal anti-immigrant MAGA Republicans, etc., they're not going to be your target. Focus on those who may be persuadable. Next slide, please. So having clarified your goal and your audiences, now that we've clarified who we're trying to persuade and towards what goal, we must craft an effective message. So we're going to go over tips and tools, what the research says about effective messaging, and how to craft your message based on values and solutions that you're seeking. Next slide, please. And I will quickly plug that instead of inundating you with all of the links to the research and citations, I've put together a resources document that will be, that'll be dropped in the chat. A resources document that points to all the research that's pulled into these tips and tools today, so that you can dig deeper if that's of interest to you. So, messaging research on immigrants and the US immigration system repeatedly shows that people think they know more about undocumented immigrants and how the US immigration system works than they actually do. So to address this, research tells us we have to do several things. So tip number one, we need to use simpler language and cut out the jargon. So assume, regardless of what you know about how things actually work, assume that you need to break things down for your audiences, especially because every family, every person's immigration case or situation is different. So second tip, you should demonstrate your own learning journey on immigration. Because surprise, people don't like to be made to feel stupid or like they've been out of the loop. So it's really helpful to come into a conversation with a posture of, well, what I've learned about immigration since being in this work, or something that I didn't know, but then I learned along the way is, so some of those opening phrases that help demonstrate your own learning journey that invites others along on that journey with you. And tip number three, show, don't tell. Bring the receipts. So share real life relatable stories and experiences of immigrant children, immigrant adults, families that you know, people that you know with their permission or anonymity. So bring those receipts, if you will. And of course, always use supporting evidence with your sources cited. So I wanted to give an example here of what not to say and what to try instead. So instead of saying President Trump's mass deportation agenda is unjustly attacking immigrant families and instilling fear among children in immigrant communities, try saying something like, and this will take longer, I get it, but we gotta bring people along. What I've begun to see in my work with families is, or it's been surprising to learn, that immigration agents are taking people even if they don't have a warrant for their arrest. For example, we had a student who, or I know of a case of, et cetera, and supporting points. Next slide, please. So messaging research on immigrants and immigration also shows that people have real concerns regarding immigration and undocumented immigrants, whether I agree with them or not. Okay, so the biggest concerns that come up for people are safety and scarcity of resources. But the research also shows that these people value caring for children. So in talking about children who are immigrants or children in immigrant families, this presents a challenge, right? We see sort of a conflict here, but it's not insurmountable. We still can bring people along with certain tips that we'll name here. So tip number one, it's critical to address and soothe the concerns that folks have. Do not dismiss them, or you will likely lose your audience. So this is not to say that you have to agree with their fear or affirm that they are correct, but you should try to address the desire behind the fear, right? So what are the desires behind the fear that we see here? We see a desire for safety, for people's own needs being met, right? Their own wellness and well-being. So to acknowledge that with even just a simple phrase as, we all want to live in safety and stability, right? To unify and affirm what's behind some of the concerns. Tip number two, as much as possible, try to replace them with us. So this is the very reason why I titled this workshop, Our Kids. We want to help our audiences identify with immigrant children and immigrant families, and rather than see them as separate or over there or other, see us all together as one integral community. So talk about immigrant children as part of our communities, our kids, our students. And why is this important? Because unfortunately, some of what the research shows is that talking about immigrants' rights or the things that immigrants deserve can activate people's zero-sum thinking or scarcity thinking. It activates that thinking of immigrants might be getting something that I'm not even getting myself. So we need to focus on how meeting the needs of children, regardless of their immigration status, benefits all of us. Tip number three, as much as possible, talk about immigrant children as children first. So what the research shows is that really we should be talking about these topics and these kiddos in the following order. First, we talk about them as people, right? Children first. Then we talk about the access to services or the things that we recognize needed as helping fulfill their needs. And then we bring in immigration status, not the other way around. So an example, instead of immigrant children deserve to go to school, they have the right to a public education, which they do, and I agree with that statement, but again, going with the research, try this instead. Everyone in society benefits when all children, regardless of their immigration status, have access to an education. Next slide, please. Research also shows that myth busting actually reinforces myths, and negation slows down understanding and even muddles meaning for people. So for example, saying that Melanie is not a monster actually only strengthens the association between Melanie and monster in people's brains. So an important tip here is that we must use affirmative language. We should be talking about who immigrant children, who immigrant families are, not who they aren't. And the second tip here is to use positive, relatable, humanizing identifiers and commonalities that show strengths and contributions, right? So all of those affirming dignifying qualities. We don't just want to focus on children's vulnerabilities or weaknesses. So why we do this? People want to hear individual stories and experiences and even personality traits or interests reflected back to them. So bring out those relatable elements. So an example, instead of saying immigrants aren't criminals, they commit crimes at lower rates than people born in the United States. This is true, but try instead. People from other countries strengthen our community. They bring new ideas and rich contributions to our schools, workplaces, businesses, and places of worship. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to quickly go through how to build our effective message. Now that we've got all the tips, we've got our goal and our audience, it's time to craft our message. So a framework that I recommend using is the Value Problem Solution Action Framework from the Opportunity Agenda. And there's a link to it in the resources document that was shared. So, and this is so important, I cannot stress it enough, that you should start and end with shared values that we can get behind. So for the conversation that we're having today, the values we're talking about are education, family, freedom, choice, humane treatment, protecting children, safety, opportunity, and the list goes on. So think of those core values and bring that into your messaging at the start and at the finish. Second, you'll describe the problem or the harm that you're seeking to address, and do so concretely and credibly. So you'll use the previous sessions with all the amazing research and critical data points that were mentioned. Point to those, pull those into your problem statement. But don't go too far. Don't describe too many different problems, or you risk emotionally flooding your audience and they might tune you out. So zero in on the problem that will most directly connect the dots to the solution that you seek. So you'll name the solution to the problem, including an aspirational vision that says what you're for. So offer solutions that are realistic and concrete, like partnering with a legal service provider for your school. And then be clear and direct and specific about your call to action and who you want to take it. Or you might be naming the actions that you're already taking that you want XYZ people to join you in. And finally, just a quick note on messengers. Depending on your audience, you will want to consider who will be the best messenger. And on these topics in particular, some really compelling messengers, according to the research, is parents of US-born students, teachers and administrators, immigrants themselves, including both documented and undocumented, faith leaders, social workers, medical professionals. All of these folks are critical voices for communicating your message. And next slide. So to bring all of this together, I put together a VPSA message based on the example we went over before, right? So trying to get school administrators to bring a legal partnership to support families. So here's our VPSA message. We want all of our students to be able to get an education without fear. But recent arrests of immigrant parents near the school have made students afraid and dropped our attendance. To create a greater sense of safety for students and their families, we want to create, we want to create walking school buses and partner with X organization to provide legal counsel to families. We ask the school administration and board to join us in bringing these services to our families so that our students can continue to safely receive an education regardless of family members' immigration status. So I hope that's one helpful example that we've brought to the table based on all the tips and tools here. We can go to the next slide and hop to Q&A. So feel free, if you have any questions for me on messaging, what the research says on effectiveness with different audiences, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer. I'm seeing a question from Kate. Advice for overcoming the "but they are breaking the law" response. Yes, that is that's a very challenging one. So in the resources document that I gave you, you'll see towards the bottom, there's, I put all of the examples of the, like, instead of saying this, try this. One thing that I try to elevate in response to that very point is, again, with that sort of demonstrating a learning journey, what I've come to learn in my work is that the immigration system is very outdated, and it actually it has made people undocumented. And people are, trying to find a way, but it's often made impossible by how outdated the system is. And then pivot to Congress needs to update it so that there's workable pathways. I hope that's helpful. And I see Priya turned on your camera, so I think that means I'm at time. Thank you all so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa. Let's get some love again in the chat for Melissa's incredible presentation and for providing y'all with so many wonderful tools and new frameworks and how you all can rethink maybe your own communication strategy. So again, we will be sure to share a lot of the stuff that Melissa discussed in our follow-up materials. Reminder, please feel free to use the chat if you have any lingering questions for Melissa. We'll get to them asynchronously in our Q&A box. And with that, I am excited to turn us to our final panel of the day, Holding the Line, State Advocates Standing Up for Immigrant Families. Across the country, immigrant families are facing mounting challenges driven by harmful policy changes both at the state and federal level. Yet, in the face of this adversity, incredible leaders are stepping up, resisting, organizing, and building forward. Today, we're joined by 4 powerful advocates leading efforts to protect immigrant families at the state level. First, we're joined by Liv Cook, a campaign organizer with statewide organizing for community empowerment in Tennessee. Liv works with families to advance educational equity and push back against anti-immigrant policies. Next, we have Viridiana Maureen, East Tennessee community organizer with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. Viridiana leads regional efforts focused on immigrant justice, civic engagement, and community power. We're also joined by Allison Hard, Director of Public Policy at the National WIC Institute. Allison brings a deep expertise on how to access public benefits like nutrition support and is shaped by state policy, especially for immigrant families. Lastly, we have Ninfa Amador, the Maryland Policy Manager at CASA. Ninfa leads efforts to expand protected areas that reduce immigration enforcement in sensitive locations and ensure safe access to services. Our session today will be moderated by Linda Corchado, the Senior Director of Immigration at Children at Risk. Linda brings a deep policy and legal lens to this conversation and will guide us through a rich discussion on community resistance, state-level wins, and where we go next. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda to begin the conversation.
Thank you, Priya, our fabulous MC. And thank you all again. I'm really excited about this panel, really because I think we all agree that the world seems really broken right now. The battlegrounds across our country continue to keep changing, but this segment is focused on hope and how, as we continue to go through these dark times together, we must look to our own communities for answers to a better way forward. So with that said, let's keep that theme of messaging going as we look at a hotly contested issue, which, when you think about it, is one of the most basic concerns that any person would share, which is basic food security and access to healthcare. Allie, tell us more about your messaging analysis for defeating harmful bills that would limit immigrant families' access to health and nutrition benefits.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and amongst these amazing women. I am Allie Hart. I'm the policy director at the National WIC Association, and you might wonder why we're on this panel about state policy, but we as a national organization have really started engaging at the state level to try to protect access to the federal WIC program, because unfortunately we are starting to see that's where attacks are coming in terms of access to the WIC program. And just briefly to kind of talk about why that is, under the federal law, the federal actually welfare reform law from the 90s, WIC basically as a benefit is up to states whether they want to check immigration status or not. So that is different from programs like SNAP, where there's long been some kind of a check, although that has shifted, right? And we've seen that shift in a really negative way in the One Big Beautiful Bill. But for WIC, it's always been a state choice. And so we've really had the privilege of serving families regardless of status, and being really one of kind of the frontline resources for families who are newly arriving in this country. Unfortunately, so we've had one state in the past, that was Indiana, who did take up the federal option to check immigration status and limit WIC access. That went on for several years and actually ended in 2022. And I'm getting around to the messaging piece, because what happened was there was an advocate actually who she worked in a WIC clinic, and she was DACA, and she was the daughter-in-law, I believe, of the chairman of the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Indiana State Legislature. And so she said to her father-in-law, hey, this is really a harmful policy and we don't have to do this, let's change it. And so because of her personal story and sharing that, she was able to change that policy for Indiana. So from 2022 to 2025, there was actually no state that was checking immigration status and WIC. And so we were able to serve everyone, which was really incredible. Unfortunately, this spring that changed, and we had the first state since then to take up that option and put that into law starting on July 1st, and that's Idaho. So since then, we've been really mobilizing and trying to organize in states where we see a risk for legislation limiting access. And I would say in terms of messaging, I think that personal story piece, and I know I've heard that throughout this afternoon today, I think that's really key. I know for me, I talk sometimes about how this is a really personal part of my work, because my husband's family relied on WIC when they were brand new to this country. They came from China in the 80s, and WIC was vital for them. And it's something that I think about a lot, that if they didn't have the access, what that would have been like for his parents, who were washing dishes basically in Chinese restaurants when they first got here, and had this baby they needed to take care of. So So I think those personal stories really resonate. And then I think for us also, we're really trying to engage religious groups. I think they can be great messengers right now. It can really talk, I think, to folks on all sides of the political spectrum. So we try to partner a lot with them. We try to partner with folks in the food and agriculture industry for the same reason. And they're really key stakeholders in programs like WIC, where, we're not only providing a food nutrition benefit to families, but we're also stimulating the agriculture and retail economy. So thinking about, engaging them. And then we talk about cost savings too. I think that can be an important message. We know that for WIC, for example, for every dollar invested, it saves $2.48 in federal healthcare spending. So I think those kinds of messages can really resonate in terms of kind of bringing folks into our coalition. But we're also I think we're still learning. So I will say, I don't know that we have the magic sauce yet. And I really appreciated the presentation just before this too.
Well, I mean, with that context, right, that you are still learning, I'll ask you this one question before I turn it over to Ninfa. But how would you define this next moment? You kind of gave us some context, right? Looking at states now, that's the new battleground. How do you define this moment when it comes to threats to WIC at the state level as we settle into this post HR1 reality?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think we are definitely anticipating an impact on WIC because there was such a significant change to SNAP and Medicaid, as we heard about in the federal policy panel. So WIC was not directly cut by the reconciliation bill, but folks become eligible for WIC through their participation in SNAP and Medicaid. So we know that about 80% of folks who are on WIC right now, that's how they're getting eligible in terms of their income. So we could kind of see two different trends happening, I think, and we're waiting to kind of see how it plays out. I think on the one hand, we're going to see fewer people who are adjunctively eligible, meaning coming in through those programs. But I think on the other hand, I think we're going to see a real increase in the need for services like WIC. And because we don't have, in most states, besides Idaho, we don't have immigration tests at all, I think folks do turn to us. And so we could also see, I think, an uptick in that need for WIC services. And I think, I will note too, over the last several years, we've seen a real, or last few years, we've seen a real uptick in WIC participation. That's been since about 2022. We had actually been declining in participation nationally for about a decade, and then that reversed. And we think it's for a number of reasons. Part of it, we think, is the pandemic. Part of it is that WIC's become a lot more accessible. We have things like remote services, and our benefit package is a lot better. We've significantly increased the amounts of fruits and vegetable benefits you can get, for example. And so one thing that we're hearing kind of anecdotally, whereas I think in the first Trump administration, we really saw a big flight from the program as folks were very concerned about public charge. Now, I think because we have remote services and because WIC is not checking status, we are actually anecdotally, we're hearing that immigrant families are continuing to turn to us. And so, and I think even through very difficult moments, right? So we get stories. We have our largest local agency is in LA, and they told us a story about a family who I think they were able to recertify them on the phone while the mom was hiding from ICE actually at her workplace. So just like, I think heartbreaking stories, but also really good to hear that they're able to get those benefits to folks in a way that we didn't have that option in the first Trump administration. So I think there's an opportunity for WIC, and we're going to be really pushing to continue to get more funding for the programs, that we can continue meeting the need of everyone who comes through our doors. And also really trying to protect our ability to serve everyone who is eligible and to prevent any additional immigration tests, and hopefully we're going to be pushing for repeal in Idaho, so that hopefully we go back to not having any states that exclude folks.
Allie, thank you for that. What a powerful story. And really, it drives home that one clear message. Immigrant families really need community right now, and they really need a trusted space. So that's wonderful work that you're all doing. Thank you for sharing some of that insight. Neef, I want to turn it over to you. In Maryland, after the Trump administration ended safe spaces for children and families, why did GASA decide that you needed to consider state level legislation in Maryland to tackle this crisis? And importantly, what strategies did you take to prop you up for success?
Thank you so much, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm tuning in from the council chambers in Prince George's County. We just heard a bill that seeks to protect our immigrant families, county workers even further. So I appreciate your patience with me today. But of course, as you said, Tessa knew, right, that should Trump win the presidency, he would fulfill his pledge and enlist in the largest mass deportation campaign that we have seen in US history. We knew that Project 2025 wasn't just some writing, but it was indeed the playbook, the roadmap to this administration. And so we looked at the tools that we have as a state. And in Maryland, we have a strong legislature that, for the most part, has worked very hard to pass legislation to protect vulnerable Marylanders, including our immigrant families. And we know that at this moment, right, under a Trump presidency, the last line of defense against these cruel, heinous, anti-immigrant, anti-minority policies of the administration, our state legislatures, our local legislatures are our last line of defense. So we knew that, in the Maryland General Assembly had to act, and it had a very active role to play in protecting immigrant families. So there was a 2025 immigrant justice package that included sensitive locations as a pillar. Part of Project 2025, right, outlined the need to change policies that were quote unquote sanctuary policies for immigrant families. And once on day one, that the protected areas or the sensitive locations memo was rescinded, we were already on board of what to do. And during the same time period, we were getting news reports of ICE being around our school campuses, high school campuses. And there was just a lot of things going on where certain teachers or certain of our public high schools were making Twitter statements about their students, kind of tweeting at ICE on X to come get their students. So we just knew that we had to act as a state. And for a number of reasons, sensitive locations policies or these protected areas bills make sense. First, they value the safety and security in doing some of the most mundane, some of those menial tasks like going to school, the essential services of a doctor's office, or any other social services that we can think of. And if you value, if legislators value the constitutional protections of not being searched without a warrant, then this bill was the bill for them, Secondly, the bill also had very minimal economic impacts on the budget, while having maximum protection for the families that are going to school, the families that are having to leave their house every day to go do these essential services. So this is just something that was plain and simple that the legislature could act on to protect their constituents during a time where individuals are looking to their elected representatives to do something on their behalf and protect them against any measure of the, massive input that Trump wants to have into our lives. And at the core of this bill, right, it passed in 2025. It simply ensures that ICE needs to have a warrant. So it goes back to those constitutional protections of warrantless searches, that this is not something that will happen in certain areas, particularly in private areas. But we also, I'll stop here. And there are a couple of strategy questions. We also made sure to enlist not just the legislature and the government sectors that this would have impacted, but also faith leaders and business leaders, other institutions and organizations that provide these services for our immigrant families in Maryland.
Well, I can tell you, it's so inspiring to hear this. I'm currently in El Paso, Texas, so these kinds of stories are really encouraging. And congratulations to you guys with amazing work. You're kind of talking about all of these great allies in the state, a lot of these great messengers, right, to kind of be your soldiers in this amazing fight. But I wonder, how were you also able to leverage national partnerships in the statewide strategy?
Definitely, we didn't do this alone. We had local, statewide allies. And we know that the protected sensitive locations memo that was rescinded on January 20th had been a decades-long policy of the Department of Homeland Security. It was a policy including during Trump's first term, right? So we can point out, and we were able to point out certain rhetoric during his campaign where we were flagged that things like the rescission of this memo was very, very likely to happen in a 2.0 presidency. So this type of policy would be swiftly stripped. As a state organization or representative, we work very closely with our state partners who knew what was going on in the federal field and like the federal sector. And we were able to count on their expertise of this decades-long policy and see how it could look like on a Maryland state basis. We were also able to count on other state leaders, many of them on the call today too, because they have also done things like this that Maryland had in California, Colorado, for example, Nevada. They have put some of these protections in place already. So we definitely looked up to those examples.
Thank you, Ninfa. And stick around. I have one last question. But thanks for joining and sharing that insight. So our last stop in the country here is in Tennessee, where our friends faced an existential crisis brought by the Tennessee legislature that would upend decades of legal precedent with an attack on Plyler. That's a critical Supreme Court decision which ensures all children in America, no matter their status, can access free public education. Liv, my first question is to you. How did you all determine which were those vital speakers that the Tennessee legislature had to listen to as they debated the future of Plyler?
Yeah, so I think one thing to note is that was really a coalition effort. We had all these organizations come in across the state to form this Education for All coalition with national support. And so we really leaned on those partners that had that inside knowledge. I mean, it's just, if you're an organizer, you know, good power analysis. And so thanks to folks at Turk and Ed Trust and all these other amazing people who kind of had an understanding of the interplay of what do the legislators value? How have they voted previously? What are the levers of power that we have, either their business connections or their faith connections, using all of that and making sure that we had the right messengers in the right places. And so I think it was just good power analysis, I think was a lot of it. And I think I work for SOCM, coordinating the Public School Strong campaign. And part of our work was how do we not just in Nashville target those legislators, but also at home? And so part of our role was really engaging school boards to act on this. And so some school board resolutions were passing in different parts of the state where they were saying, actually, we said that we're going to educate all kids. And if we're going to say all, we really mean all, not just some. And so in particular, where we noticed a lot of power was in Chattanooga, which is where Senator Watson, that was his district. He was one of the sponsors. And our Public School Strong team, along with local orgs on the ground, showed up in full force to their school board. And so you saw this like mass community outpouring of our communities are not whole without all of our students. And so we saw also in some rural counties like McMinn County, where I live, you had an all-white school board, all very tend to lean anti-immigrant, and you had a packed school board room with all of these neighbors supporting these immigrant students speaking up. So I think it was a twofold. We had to target people in the legislature and also target people at home, those secondary targets. So, and then Vida, you can speak on this too, but that was kind of my perspective within the coalition.
Thanks for sharing. Vida, I've heard this story several times about the success that you all had in Tennessee. And when I've heard you speak about this before, I always wondered what's one thing that surprised you as you were doing that grassroots work, mobilizing people across the state during these efforts?
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. Yes, one thing as you know, I'm BD. I work for Turk, Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition, and I think it was the challenge to um, when it came to the conversation that education was for all children. It surprised me that it was so challenging to like talk about, or that there were so many people that were like, well, like it makes sense, or that would make comments around like, um, we saw this in the committees, where one of the sponsors of the bill said, we're lying to these children, telling them they could be whoever they want, but it's not true at the end of the day. And like that, I think it was very surprising, even though, you know, at the end of the day, especially, in the South, when it comes to immigration, how some people might feel about it. But it was surprising how many people just didn't, care that it was children that we were talking about. And then it was also surprising to see people that you wouldn't expect to say something, say things like, enough is enough, like this has gone too far. Mhm.
That's beautiful. So you saw the good and the bad all at the same time, and you won.
Yes, we did. We saw the
Great.
good and the bad. And with that being said, though, like when we knew that this piece of legislation was being presented, we instantly knew we were in like a fight for our lives. We instantly knew that this wasn't going to stop in Tennessee, that this was now going to challenge Plyer versus Doe. We knew all of those things, and so going into it, we were told by many others like it's gonna win. And that was also surprising how quickly it was moving forward. Um, with that being said, it was the stories like we've all talked about. It was the teachers that organized outside of school hours, and that were using their voices. It was the principals that organized and wrote letters, the businesses that organized and wrote a letter and signed it off coming out of Hamilton County. Pastors, faith leaders organized and wrote letters. Kids did as well. I mean, we had sign making banners, education is for all. Kids would make banners saying, don't take my education away. And mothers were like, parents, they were like, we're not backing down. We're not going to let this slide. These are our kids. And there were stories like from our community, where they would say, I've given everything to this country. I've even given my children and said, follow the rules and go to school. And now this is what they're saying is the best thing, right? And it's not. And so even though this was a horrible moment that took a lot from us, um, it was a moment too where we were able to really organize. And it's in those moments where we can take those opportunities to educate ourselves as to what's really going on, who's really making these decisions, and why are these decisions allowed to, be passing and happening. And it was an opportunity to invest in leadership in our community as well. And when we saw, like Liv was talking in Hamilton County, that resolution passed, it was like another way to say, like, this is not what your constituents want. And so with all of these efforts, everyone coming together, this was truly all people powered, because without those stories and kids testifying, I'm not sure we would have gotten the same result.
Yeah. And when I hear about those stories, I wonder, was that it, that like this is enough, that moment? Was that the moment that people needed to think beyond the fear? If I do this, what if ICE is around the corner? What if they take photos of me and they come for me? Or was that it that kind of made them feel like I'm not gonna sit this one out?
Yeah. Yes, it was that like sense of justice, the sense of frustration, of this is education that we're taking away from children because of where where they call home. It was that really grew that collectiveness as to we're not going to back down, because as we know, it's one of us. It feels like, oh, a little bit more. We can feel fearful to use our voice, but together as organizers, that's what we were doing. We're hearing folks' stories, and then we were all gathering. So we could all see, like, you're not the only one that's feeling like this. And so now here are all the ways that we can still use our voice and take action. And we didn't have to do any convincing there, because at the end of the day, we were right. Like, this wasn't about politics. We were correct. And it was like, if it came down to like the moral issue of it all, we were correct. And we needed to take that with us, because we always said, no matter what happens, this fight isn't done, because we will continue. And the people that did it were committed. And out of those community members, we have more leaders now.
Yes,
And
that's beautiful.
and if
Sure,
I can
Liz.
add, yeah, just one more thing onto that. I think like what was really beautiful about what we were able to do in Tennessee was like the breadth of like multiracial organizing that happened. And I think when you think about the South, you don't think that. That is not what comes to mind. And I think like showing the power of like we had Black and brown folks, we had white folks, we had working class, middle class, all of these people came together because they knew that all of our liberty was tied up together. So we had white suburban moms talking about like my child's right to learn is tied up in their friend's right to learn. And so I think and connecting the pieces of, Tennessee's had a lot of legislation that fundamentally comes down to like picking and choosing who gets to be human at school, whether it's through these like predatory voucher programs or, laws like this or dismantling DEI. So I think like it was just, I think it showed what's possible. Like Rudy said, it was a horrible circumstance, but I think like the power that we're building moving forward of like what we can do in the South, and if we can do it here, like y'all can do it wherever you're at, but I think that also provided some level of safety of like my entire community is here with me. And yeah, I just think it was when I'm feeling very defeated, I just think back of like, no, like we really all came together, and my hope is that we continue to do so.
I never thought I'd say this. Tennessee is the future of America. Maybe this is what we'll look like in 3 years, right?
There's power in the South. There's power in the
Yeah.
South, yes.
May Texas hear you loud and proud. This is my final question for all of you, because you guys are just overwhelming me with the good vibes, and this is great. But we're also surrounded by advocates that are looking at their own battles, right, in their communities, in their state. When advocates face these overwhelming changes to state and federal policy that impact children of immigrants, what's one valuable lesson that they can take away with them from your own experience? Allie, we'll start with you.
I think I'm going to go back to the value of just the personal stories and connecting. I think that is really important, and certainly for me, I think that ability to connect with folks and to keep coming back to like, why am I doing this? I just keep coming back to it because it is a really hard time, as has been recognized. So coming back to that and just staying in community with each other, I think, and that I loved hearing about your Tennessee work and the multiracial community building. I believe in that so strongly that's the answer, and I think so much of what's happening is seeking to divide us. So I think it's such a radical and wonderful thing to come together.
Thanks for sharing. Nifa, please.
Thank you. I think one of the main things that, as we think about children of immigrants and children who are immigrants, we need to see their growth. One of the main efforts that I see in the advocacy that I've been a part of in Maryland and Annapolis for the past 3 years is that every year the effort and the power of the youth has risen. They are powerful, they have a voice, and one of the beauties of the way of life democracy, or at least how it was prior to 2025, is that freedom of speech, that freedom of expression, that either was or is still granted. And these children of immigrants and these immigrant children, the youth, the young people are amazing in their power and their advocacy, and we should not dim their light. I'll end with the example of Tony the Tiger. I think it was shared in the chat if you want to click on that link. A powerful fourth grader who led us into victory for the Protecting Sensitive Locations Act, who goes by the name of Tony the Tiger, who really stepped up during a time he was hearing the injustices that were going on, and he spoke to his mom and then spoke to us at Casa and said, I want to be there. I know you guys are having an event, and my friends and my family are too scared, and I don't want this to be the reality. So just leaving it there to, parameters in place, protections in place, but allowing these individuals to really show us their power, because they have the lived experiences that we are talking about, and we need to put them on the front lines as best and as safe as we can.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tony. Liv.
Yeah, I think a lesson to take in is just to lean in. I think we're really divided. We're all really scared, and the risks are high. But I think the more people that we're bringing together, the more power that we have, the more safety that we have. So whether you're a grass tops organization, a research or policy person, lean into those ordinary people, because that's where the change is going to happen. And so I think resist the temptation to despair, I think, is the biggest thing. And also call out who those villains are. Don't beat around the bush. Say it's like these powerful few that are doing it. And I think more people are able to come together than we realize.
Thank you. And finally, Reedy.
Man, okay, everything everyone has said exactly that. I think so too. As these times, like we're talking, they're so overwhelming, and it's almost sometimes it feels like, man, like are we moving forward, right? Like what's going on? But for me personally, the best way for me to be able to see and notice that we're moving forward is when I see my community responding with power. And when I see my community responding with education and power versus with fear. And that's how I know that we are, because a lot of the times it is easy to get lost in like the flashiness of which is important, which is the big bills and all of that, which is, I totally agree. But the steady work of defeating those kind of bills are the everyday work. That is the way that we get there. Because, for example, like, when I'll use for an example, this for their education for all, and when this bill showed up, it wasn't like, we were just like, okay, like let's try to gather some folks, right? It was the folks that we had already been building relationships with. We had been preparing for what was to come, and also we had been working closely with and investing in their leadership so they could be the ones to lead their communities in this fight. And so I think leaning into that and leaning into your own I would say too, in your own community building space as well, to always remember that you're not alone doing this work. This work can sometimes feel pretty lonely, but being able to create that building space, not only are you able to also bounce ideas off of one another, but also know that this work, this is a time right now that won't last forever. And together we have the answers. And so being able to not lose sight of that as well.
Every single panelist can officially drop the mic. It was a success. We doubled down on hope. Priya, back to you. Thank you all.
Wonderful. And my God, what a powerful note and message to end today's summit on. Thank you again to our wonderful state panelists for sharing your stories and highlighting all of the critical work that you are doing across the country to protect and uplift children and immigrant families. We're so grateful to all of our panelists and speakers today for all of the wonderful and rich perspectives they've provided, the information they've shared, and the way that they have really inspired us to keep on moving forward and to keep on tapping into the resiliency and the collective power we all have. This too shall pass, and I can't think of a better group of people to be working with right now to support families in this moment and keep moving forward. So, for a couple of things for closeout. Again, just echoing thank yous to our speakers, partners, organizers, and of course to our wonderful attendees for being here today, for showing up, and for really echoing your commitment to protect immigrant and children families. I would just like to take a moment to encourage everyone to please complete our event survey using the link in the chat or by scanning this QR code. Your feedback really helps us improve and continue to offer free learning opportunities like this, so we appreciate any input that you can provide. I also would like to promote the upcoming event that's being hosted by Children at Risk, which is the 2025 STEM Summit. A QR code should pop up shortly if you are interested in registering for that event as well. We will be sharing the recording around to everyone who's attended today, as well as to those who registered, and Children at Risk will put up a blog reflecting on the summit that will have the recording linked in there as well if you would like to share it with your colleagues. Thank you all again for attending today's conversation. We appreciate you. We hope you have a good rest of your day and you find a way to stay engaged in this work. All right, thanks everyone.